We're in Paragraph Gimel. Again, we're still on page Chavtes on top, 98 at the bottom. Okay. We're going to start 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 lines from the bottom. I know part of this we learned already, but we stopped in the middle. Okay. Says, the Rebbe is explaining so far what we learned last week, that mitzvos are called the limbs of Hashem, the organs of Hashem. Traitor, on the other hand, is one with Hashem. A limb is bottled, subjugated, completely non-existent when it comes to the soul. The second the person wants to move the hand, they move the hand. So the limb is completely bottled to the soul, but it's two different things. Like in the neshama and a body, it's two different things. Soul and limbs are two different things. Traitor, on the other hand, the Zohar says, is one thing with Hashem. And Al Rebbe is in the middle of explaining that. And he says like this. Now the Al Rebbe again is explaining the advantage of traitor over mitzvos. Because traitor is above everything. And it's the will of Hashem, because this is what Hashem wants in traitor. Hashem says in traitor, if this guy says this and this guy says this, the rule should be this. If something falls into something else, what is Hashem's will? It should be kosher or not kosher. What is this encompassing level? Meaning, it's a level that's too great to normally come into the world. It gives life. It illuminates to the neshama, bechinas makif, in an encompassing level. And yet, I'm going to explain this. That when a person learns Torah, this encompassing level, this superficial level, that's too great to normally come into the body, comes into the nefesh and its garments, gilui mamish, in a revealed way, when you learn Torah. Meaning like this. We learned already many, many times in Tanya and in the Tanya that we learned already also. There is, just like the Medrash says, just like the neshama permeates the body, God permeates the world. That means there's a correlation between neshama and body and Hashem in the world. Neshama in the body gives two types of life. We discussed this not that long ago, so I'll make it short, brief. When the neshama, one type of life the neshama gives to the body is alive. The second the person's born, the neshama comes into the body is alive. From head to toe, the body is alive. That's one type of life the neshama gives to the body, that the whole body exists and is alive. In that life of the neshama, there's no difference between head and toes. The head is alive and the feet are alive. There's no difference between head and feet. Why? Because none of them are vessels for it. In other words, normally the head has higher faculties than the foot. But the head has higher faculties than the foot only in those things that permeate the faculties. What do you mean, permeate the faculties? If you want to think, you have to use your brain. You don't use a nose to think. The brain is the limb for thinking. The mouth is a limb for talking. The nose is the limb for smelling. The ears listening, hands, whatever it is. Over there, there's a difference. In other words, one type of life the neshama gives to the body is it's all equal, because it's too powerful to come internally within each particular limb. And because it doesn't penetrate it, it doesn't permeate it, everything is equal. Then you have a second life that the neshama gives to the body. That is the permeating, functioning level of the neshama. Neshama wants to see, the eyes are the vessel for that. The neshama wants to talk, it's the mouth. It wants to write, it's the hands, go, feet, whatever it is. Over there, the neshama in Hasidic language is called, it dresses itself into the body. Over there, vessels matter. The higher faculty, the higher vessel, gets more or different of the neshama than the lower ones. That is in the direct relationship between body and soul. In the indirect, what's called makif, superficial, encompassing level, that it's not affecting it directly, over there, head and foot are equal. In Hashem's sustenance of the world, there's two things also. One power of Hashem is world exists. That's it. Inanimate, plant, animal, human, heaven, earth, universe. It exists. Does a stone exist less than a person? No. A stone exists and a person exists. They're equal in that. Then you have the permeating level, the way the world functions. Over there, a person is higher than an animal, which is higher than plant, which is higher than inanimate. The same thing is in godly revelations of spirituality. There are levels of godliness that are what's called makifim level. It's super great, basically infinite levels of God that cannot permeate and internalize in limited utensils, in limited worlds, because it's infinite. That's called makif. Pnimi, that's the limited level of godliness that permeates each world. Atzilus on its level, Bria on its level, Yetzirah on its level, Asiya on its level, and each level on its own million, zillion levels that each one has by itself. What the Rebbe is saying over here, traitor is infinite. How can infinite godliness internalize itself into a human being? And the Rebbe said that's the greatness of traitor. Traitor is internal, unlike mitzvos. Mitzvos you don't internalize. You do a mitzvah. It's not like Torah learning is in your brain. It's inside of you. Mitzvahs you do superficially. Now the Rebbe says, what's the uniqueness of learning Torah? You're taking Hashem's wisdom, which is infinite, and you are internalizing that infinite level that normally can never, ever be revealed, and you're internalizing it within the brain when you learn Torah. And he says, even though you might not feel it, you might not feel this, but like the Gemara says, your mazel feels it, your neshama feels it. You don't feel it, but your neshama feels it. And therefore, and he says, on the contrary, the Alter Rebbe says, because you don't feel it, that's why you could exist. Because if you would feel that infinite level of God, you would be completely nullified. You would be completely non-existent, bottle. He says, in the brackets, you're able to handle learning Torah without platzing, because you don't feel it. And on the other hand, in the higher spiritual worlds, they feel it, and therefore they're completely bottled. Why doesn't Hashem want us to feel it in our bodies? It's a very simple thing. If we would feel godliness, there wouldn't be free choice in Torah and mitzvos. If we would feel godliness, the way godliness feel is how we would never be able to sin. We would be so non-existent, nullified, and bottled to Hashem, we wouldn't be able, there's nothing else but Hashem. So then we don't have free choice in Torah and mitzvos. Hashem wants us to have free choice in Torah mitzvahs because he wants us to have dira b'tachteinim. He wants to make a dwelling place in a low, physical, coarse, mundane world with the Yetzer Hara, with the body. So therefore Hashem says, I don't want you to feel it. Your neshama feels it. It affects you in an unbelievable way. It refines you. But you're not going to feel it. And he says, that's why you can exist, because you don't feel it. And he says now, with this we can understand lama godla ma'id, why it's infinitely greater. The occupation of Torah, Yosef mikol mitzvos, greater than all the other mitzvahs. Again, remember, we mentioned last time that in certain places in Chassidus it says mitzvahs are greater. In certain places in Chassidus it says, here the Rebbe is talking the greatness of Torah over mitzvahs. That what? It's even greater than tefillah. It's even greater than davening, which are really yichud elam esalyanim, the unity of higher spiritual worlds. Tefillah is connection, binding. There's a tremendous level of tefillah. Look, you know, the Rebbe, when the Rebbe was seeking the path in Yiddishkeit, the Rebbe was already this unbelievable scholar, unbelievable great person. He was looking for a path in Judaism. And he heard there's two places, one in Vilna by the Vilna Gaon, and one in Mizrich by the Maggid of Mizrich. And the Rebbe heard that in Vilna you learn how to learn, and in Mizrich you learn how to daven. And the Rebbe said to himself that learning I know a little bit, davening I know nothing. I went to Mizrich, and thank God the Rebbe went to Mizrich. If not, we would all be misnagdim. The Rebbe went to Mizrich, and that's why we became Chassidim of the Rebbe, the Baal Shem Tov, and the teachings of Chassidus. If not, we wouldn't be Chassidim. So he says you can imagine the greatness of Torah. Of Tefillah, and yet learning Torah is even greater than Tefillah. So now the Rebbe asks in the brackets, so the question now is like this. In Halach it says, like Rav Shimon Bar Yochai was called Terasi Umnasi. Torah was his occupation. All he did was Torah. Those people, and there are a few sages in the Gemara like that, by the way, they did not daven. They did definitely not every day. The Gemara says in Shabbos, Rashbi didn't daven, and this Rav Yehuda davened once every 30 days. And why? Because they were so involved in Torah. Somebody who's not 24/7 completely indulged in Torah, they have to daven. They have to stop learning and go daven. So the Rebbe asks, we just got through saying Torah is greater than Tefillah, so why do they stop to daven? And he says, why? Because these people stop for other things also. Rashbi and those people, they didn't stop for anything. So they don't stop for davening either, because learning is greater than davening. People that stop for other things, if they stop for other things, then they have to stop for davening also. But over here, Torah is infinitely good. Why? Because Torah brings down the infinite level of Hashem internally. It brings down the infinite level of Hashem on an internal basis that we feel it, even though we don't feel it, but the neshama feels it, and that connects a person greater to Hashem. And here the Rebbe is saying another thing. And the Rebbe has a beautiful comment on what the Rebbe is saying here. It says, from this, an intellectual person can understand to bring upon themselves a great level of fear, but the Torah when he learns Torah. We know by Matan Torah, the Gemara says By Matan Torah, the nation were fearful. They had a fright attack, so to speak. And the Gemara says, just like by Matan Torah, the aim of Bereses of Bezerah, they were sweating and they were shot in fear and awe. Every time a person learns Torah, they have to have the same level of fear. He says that over here, a person, when they learn Torah, will bring themselves to a much greater level of fear of Hashem. Why? And he says, she is Bainin when he meditates. The way his soul and the garments of the soul in his mind and mouth. Either unite, like he just said, you become one with Hashem, with an ultimate unity. The person down here gets this level of godliness. That nothing, the whole higher world, and nothing compared to Hashem. And that level, the Jew gets when he learns Torah. So he said that causes a tremendous level of fear on the person. And now the Rebbe says like this. Because of the superior, and this is what the Rebbe says, it's in printed lessons in Tanya, but the Rebbe explains, the Rebbe explains what the Rebbe is saying is like this. The Rebbe is saying, because learning Torah brings down a greater level of godliness than mitzvos do, because you're internalizing the infinite level of Hashem. So therefore, it causes a tremendous fear that you wouldn't have without learning. In other words, and he says, this creates a greater awe of Hashem than mitzvahs do in those that perform the mitzvahs. And therefore, the Rebbe writes, this latter quality is more important than since the goal of all mitzvahs is to fear Hashem. The whole purpose of Torah mitzvahs is to fear Hashem. This mitzvah of Torah brings a person to a higher level of fear of God and awe of God and respect and reverence of Hashem more than any other mitzvah does. And here the Rebbe is going to say another interesting point. The Gemara says, the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos, Im ein yira, ein chachma. If there's no fear, there's no chachma. If there's no chachma, there's no fear. So the obvious question is, what's the chicken and what's the egg? Is fear first or is wisdom first? So the way the Chassidus explains it, especially Chassidus, but the Chassidus elaborates on this. There is a lower level of fear that brings you to learn Torah, Chochmah. But when you have Chochmah, you come to a much, much, much greater level of fear. So we're not talking about fear, wisdom, fear. We're talking about 4 distinct levels. In order to learn Torah, in order to do mitzvahs, you need to have some fear of Hashem, some awe of Hashem. So it's not why would you do it? You do it because I know this is what Hashem wants. I don't want to rebel against him, like Dr. Rebbe said before. I don't want to rebel against Hashem, so I do mitzvahs. That's a level of fear. What does that fear bring a person to? Chachma, to learn Torah. It means Chachma, but if you don't have that level of Torah, you don't have the higher level of fear. That is the fear that comes especially through learning Torah. Doing mitzvahs also, but not the same level as learning Torah. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe is going to say, this infinite level of Hashem is so great that the world, it doesn't permeate the world. It's way above, it's infinite, it's above even the spiritual worlds. Like we said before, it encompasses it. To give the primary life to the higher worlds. Little revelation of this infinite level of Hashem, mislabeshes b'seicham, dresses itself into the world. I'll explain in a second. Lisbil, what they're able to handle, that they should become not bottle, non-existent. Meaning like this: the higher worlds cannot handle the infinite level of God because the worlds are finite. Even the spiritual worlds, the definition of world by definition means it has limitations. A world is defined by certain spiritual measurements, 10 levels. This is Chokhmah, this is Bina, this is Das. Any definition of world, by definition, world is automatically limitation. And therefore, world, olam, is ha'elam, like we learned, concealment of God. So the worlds cannot handle infinite God. He says, a little ray of the infinite Hashem comes into each one of those spiritual worlds internally as much as they can handle. But down here, when a person learns Torah, they get that infinite level internally, that the neshama actually feels it. And that's why the purpose, like he says, the pasuk says on Chumash, Hashem commanded us all these mitzvos. Why? Hashem, to fear God. That's the whole purpose of mitzvahs. The purpose of mitzvahs is to fear Hashem. The spiritual worlds can handle that. It's only Torah down here when a person learns Torah. And that explains, before we even go further here, this explains the whole concept of Matan Torah. The Gemara says that when Matan Torah happened, Hashem sent away the Satan. He sent him somewhere. I don't know where. He sent him somewhere. Why you shouldn't come to prosecute? Why are you giving the Jews Torah if they're not going to keep it anyway? So afterwards, the Satan comes to Hashem and says, "Where's Torah?" So, I don't know. Go ask Moshe Rabbeinu. He comes to Moshe Rabbeinu. He says to Moshe Rabbeinu, "Where is Torah?" He says, "Well, I don't know." He said, "You're a liar. God told me He gave it to you." This whole thing of Torah had to be done in a physical world. Because only in the physical world, by learning Torah, do we internalize the essence of Hashem that heavens don't have. Heavens are limited. Because they're only revelations of God, because they're spiritual, they are only revelations of godliness. They cannot handle a revelation above their means. They can't, because they're limited. They can only handle what they have. If not, put water into the freezer in a glass and it's going to bust. It can't handle it. Only down here, and that's what Matan Torah accomplished, by the way. Matan Torah accomplished that Hashem gave the Torah down here in a way that we internalize it, we connect it, because only down here do we have the essence of Hashem, by learning Torah. And here, the Rebbe is saying, by learning Torah, you even have it more than when you do mitzvahs. Mitzvahs are not internalized. Mitzvahs are called garments, because garments are surrounding you. Mitzvahs are the makish level. Torah, in addition to being a mitzvah, by the way, it's also a mitzvah, like all the other mitzvahs. It has the internalization factor, that it's internalized in your brain. That means, in simple English, we didn't finish the paragraph, but to wrap it up so far, when a person learns Torah, in their brain is the essence of Hashem that's above any boundary and limitation. And Hashem, by limiting his Torah, while it remains the essential level, exists in any person that learns Torah. which explains, we discussed this in Parakeh of Tanya a long time ago when we learned Parakeh. Tzaddikim, because their mind is completely submerged in Torah, they're not involved in business, they're not involved in worldly things. Their mind, which is 24/7, connecting to Torah, their brain, this is what the Gemara says, really, Gemara alludes to it, their brain becomes a godly brain because their brain is one with Hashem. And therefore, we were learning then, by Chassidim, where you have a Rebbe, you want to know, should get married? Yes, the Rebbe. Should do surgery? Yes, the Rebbe. You buy a house, what is he, a doctor, a shadchan? Is he a real estate agent? What do you ask? He never saw you before, he never met you personally. Physically, he never met you. Spiritually, he met you. Physically, he never met you. How in the world can he decide if I should do a surgery or not? Did he see the charts? No. The answer is, does God need to see the charts? A mind of Torah, which is not influenced by worldly knowledge, which corrupts actually the Torah mind, that mind understands everything. And this is how the Rebbe explains a very interesting halach on Shulchan Aruch. At the beginning of Choshen Mishpat, the Rebbe calls the Samad, always quoted the Samad, that says, Das balabatim, Hepach das Torah. The das of business people is contrary to Torah. And the Rebbe says, that's what the halacha says. The Rebbe says, obviously, we're not talking about an ignorant person, an illiterate. I mean, of course it's not Torah. What does it mean? The halacha is, even if the guy's a scholar, he's an unbelievable scholar, but he's a balabas, meaning he's dealing in worldly things, he cannot have a true Torah perspective. Because, to use a sharp expression, it's warped and diluted by the worldly understanding. But it's tzaddik that internalizes Torah, which is the wisdom of Hashem. So their brain actually becomes the wisdom of Hashem. And by the way, every one of us, when we learn Torah, at that moment, our brain becomes, if you're in it, if you're really occupied in Torah, your brain becomes a godly brain at that moment. And that's the uniqueness of it. Okay, to be continued. Once again, tonight's class is sponsored by Yehuda's Greenberg for a Mother's Yahrzeit, which is Hey Other Saturday night and Sunday. Tzira Rochel Basil the Leib. Shem should have an Aliyah.
Amen.
Put the better. Everybody have a great Shabbos. And a Mitzvah Shem Monday night, 8 o'clock, is the Parsha class. Everybody's invited.